welcome back after the break, and now we are moving from Belarus to Afghanistan, which is certainly the most important current crisis, not only crisis of the international community, but also a crisis in the country where so many people, in particular human rights defenders, are at risk. And as I said already during the introduction yesterday, the Global Campus of Human Rights is involved in various activities to support women and other human rights defenders who are still in Afghanistan to leave the country, but in particular to distribute them among our network of about 100 universities that we have, so in order to provide them for a safe space, so both scholars and students at risk. I'm also very happy that we have a high-level panel today, and that will be moderated by Kalliope Agapiou-Josephides, who is what shall I say, a very, very long-standing friend and member of the Global Campus of Human Rights. She is the Chamonix chairholder at the University of Cyprus. She represented the University of Cyprus within the Global Campus of Human Rights and the European Master's Program from the very beginning, and she is an expert on many, many different issues, including gender-specific issues. She was chair of the European Institute for Gender Equality and also founding member of the Mediterranean Women Mediators Network, etc. But for us, she is currently also on the Global Campus Council, which is the highest governing body of the Global Campus, and Kalliope has been involved in the Venice School again, I guess from the beginning. We always had a specific aspect on gender, also gender-based violence, etc. As we have seen in Belarus, the main opposition leaders are all women, and the same we see in Afghanistan, that those who are speaking out and at the same time being those who are most targeted are women, whether for instance in the Independent National Human Rights Commission, where our friend Sima SAMAR was long time president and had to leave the country. Also the current president, we invited her to come to Venice. She was the last one of the commission that left the country under fairly dangerous circumstances. So Kalliope, I'm very, very happy that you are here with us in person, and I hand over to you the moderation of this whole session and the introduction of the different speakers. With Sima SAMAR, she's not directly participating with us, but we did an interview beforehand that will also be shown. Please.
Thank you very much, Manfred, for this introduction. I'm very pleased to be here with you and in person. I'm grateful to the Global Campus and to the Venice School for Human Rights Defenders to always have a gender dimension in their aspects, because all the phenomena from peace and democracy, war, justice, they are all gendered phenomena, and this is quite often a neglected aspect. So I can recognize publicly this sensitivity on behalf of the Global Campus, and thanks to you, Manfred, I think, and a lot of other couples who made this possible. We're also very happy to host the Sakharov Fellows selected by the European Parliament, and my experience to date, having worked for so many years with them, and with you now. I think we are all a very unique story and very dynamic. You're all trying to make this world a better place to live, and I think only for this you are to be congratulated. So let me start this session. So this is an interesting session that is held by the Global Campus, which is a big institution of more than 100 academic institutions worldwide. And the Valley School is one of the its flagship activities. So in times of distress and turmoil, the session on Voices from Afghanistan aims to provide the space and time to actively listen to women's voices from Afghanistan, value their testimonies, and reflect in solidarity concerning the ways ahead on how to secure human rights for all, so including girls and women. And as Manfred mentioned earlier, and we also saw in the previous discussion on Belarus, women human rights defenders are particularly targeted. So, as I mentioned, all social phenomena are by definition gendered, and in all societies, militarization, patriarchy, and gender-blind policies constitute important stumbling blocks towards securing human rights for all. So the protection of women's rights in conflict-torn or post-conflict countries and societies is, by definition, highly problematic. The protection of women's rights in an Islamic framework remains a big challenge, and particularly in Afghanistan in the current context. We also live in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, which did but exacerbate old and new trends of inequality between women and men, social injustice, as well as democracy all over the world. So human rights, while well articulated, are not self-enforcing. Their adoption and implementation is highly discretionary and path-dependent on many factors, including the rights bearers' own awareness, institutional culture, political will. So to hold this conversation, we have the honor and the pleasure to have with us today 3 Afghan women who have first-hand experience in this diptych we mentioned before, and I would like to thank them all for their agency and courage. So we are pleased to have Hareer HASHIM, who is connecting from remote. Hareer HASHIM is a young Afghan fellow among the Sakharov Fellows selected this year by the European Parliament, and therefore also participant in the Venice School. She's a humanitarian practitioner focused on challenging Taliban narratives through the empowerment of women Islamic scholars, which is a very interesting aspect. How to confront militarized masculinities is a big issue, and we are very pleased to meet with her. So we'll start this conversation today with Hareer, and I would like to welcome Hareer. I would like to, I have many questions in fact, but I would like to ask you one to start with. As a humanitarian activist, you found recently yourself on the other side, so somebody who needed to be rescued. I would like to give this opportunity to share with us what has been your experience, what lessons can be learned for future humanitarian activities in this respect. Hareer, you have the floor.
Hello, everyone. My name is Hareer HASHIM. I'm a young 24-year-old Afghan woman that just recently was evacuated from Afghanistan to Norway. And I would like to share that that journey was beyond my expectation. It was a 99% guaranteed death, and that 1% was mostly fate. And luckily, fate was on our side. To be very honest with you all, it was a very inhumane and undignified of an experience as an Afghan. To put yourself at such a risk where your life is in immediate danger and where everyone is looking up to you to figure out a way to save yourself and your family and everyone else that remains in Afghanistan. And this was not just my experience. This was many Afghans' experience that they were going through something very similar. August 15th was the day that Kabul was taken over by the Taliban. And I remember that I was in my office working and my family was calling me and they're like, go back home. The Taliban have come and your life is in danger. You need to just go back home. And I was like, it's okay, they're far. They're not that close to me. But then I realized that my dad came and he picked me up and we had to go back home immediately. August 18th was the day of my birthday and we had received a visa to Ireland. And we were planning on evacuating that day to Ireland. But when we went to Abbeygate or Northgate, I think, one of the two, what happened was that we had to face 3 checkpoints of the Taliban. And the first day, the Taliban were comparatively in an okayish mood, you know. They were doing their usual gun firing and everything that is, you know, used to intimidate and scare people. But the most shocking surprise to me was that on the 4th checkpost, which was run by the militaries of the US Army and the UK Army, that's where I faced the most inhumane, you know, attitude towards the people that wanted to be, you know, saved and evacuated. They used fire extinguisher on us. They used tear gas. They were shooting openly at civilians. 6 people were killed and 20 people were injured. And there was this media propaganda where they were showcasing that they were saving little kids, but then resending them back into the line of the original, you know, people. And I also saw that there was discrimination in the sense of if there was a white person, he was saved first before everyone else that was in the front line. And I think that's what really shocked me, that even though I am a local of that country, I was really like maybe 200 meters away from the soldiers to evacuate me. But we were not able to get evacuated despite we had all the right documentations, all the right contact. And we had to give up that first time and we had to go back. Several times we tried like this and we tried on our 7th attempt, we were successful. But even then, there were so many challenges that we faced. It was 3 a.m. that I got a call from my sister and she told us that we have to get ready because they have hired this security car to take us to the airport. And then we went to the airport and then there was really strict Taliban checkpoints. So we couldn't get through. And then we tried from Abbeygate and we were able to, like, we saw that the line is huge. People were, you know, crowded. No one could move. And it was the most chaotic scene on the face of the planet. It felt like the end of the world and everyone's just trying to save themselves. It's like everyone is for themselves. And my sister and I, we were the first ones to go and see if we could, you know, clear out the way for the remaining of the family. And luckily we were able to, but once we got the attraction of the Norwegian military by using a code that was given to me by my sister, that's how we got their attraction. And they told us that in order for us to get to them, we have to jump into the sewage. And never in my right mind did I think that I would do that. But I guess when it comes to survival, you don't really think about what kind of, you know, gross experiences you have to put yourself through, especially as a last remnant memory of your country. So I jumped and into that really disgusting water and I saved myself. And then I was waiting for the remaining of my family. And I was so concerned because I was like, okay, we have a person with disability. How are we going to get her across? She's not fit to do this. But luckily, we found a way. My father put her on his shoulder and he carried her across, and we were able to get across from that situation. But it took so much to just, stay alive. It took so much fight. It took so much effort. It took so much sleepless nights, support from our organization, support from family, support from, international community. But the biggest issue was getting to the airport and crossing it over. We had visas from 11 countries. So that was not an issue. For the first time, it was that easy to get visas for an Afghan person. But the biggest issue was to cross. It was one of the most difficult experiences of my life.
Thanks for sharing. I think there is a lot to reflect on. And as you said, when it comes to survival.
You're muted.
Yeah, so I'm muted. Sorry.
Sorry.
Is that okay? Okay. Thank you. So thank you so much, Hareer, for sharing this. I still have some other interesting questions for you, as you have been working on confronting militarized masculinities, aiming at deconstructing sexist stereotypes among Afghan men. What are the main lessons that you have to share with us from your experience?
Well, I was recently assigned, when I got the job in Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, Afghanistan section. That's the organization I work for. And we are the most long-standing job. This was the first project that I was supposed to lead. And I realized how fitting this project was in the context of Afghanistan, which is a patriarchal nation faced with multiple misogynistic groups that are standing as one of the biggest hurdles for Afghan women. But throughout my project and leading this project, I also realized that there's so many other men that are the biggest allies and supporters of women and the feminist movement. And we were building an alliance of 100 men. And before that, we also had an alliance of male ulama network, which was 6,000 male ulamas that had also very strict and rigid understanding of Islam. But throughout practice and workshops led by Jamila Afghani, we were able to convert or kind of moderate their understanding of Islam into something that is more acceptable in the eyes of women and with a feminist perspective. So that's the main goal that we got from, confronting these militarized masculinities, because at that point that I was leading the project, it was a totally different setting in Afghanistan. It was a peace process that was going on between two militarized regimes. But now the setting has completely shifted. We are run by a militarized regime, and it's a military dictatorship. So the context has changed immensely, but I think what hasn't changed is the passion of young, especially young Afghan men and women that want to redefine the narrative of what the world thinks of Afghanistan as a very backward-minded, conservative, very, violent country. And I think that we are showing, especially in our alliance, we're showcasing the different talents. We have people that are doctors, we have people that are lawyers, we have people that are teachers, professors, parliamentarians, government officials, police, and all kinds of religious, scholars. So it's a showcasing the diversity and also the variety of talent and knowledge, which is the main point, is to show a different definition of masculinity and a different approach to militarization from a masculine perspective.
Indeed, I think it's a
very interesting project with highly topical, let's say, conclusions. First of all, that when you have to do with masculinities or femininities, it's not only about women's rights or men's rights. It's a societal issue. And as you said, your better allies were some men that were sharing this vision of society in a more progressive way. I think this is very important, and we need to keep this in mind, because in all societies we have issues pertaining to how masculinities and femininities interact. So the other question is, you have been working on this very interesting intersection between militarized masculinities and women Islamic scholars, ulemas. What was your recollection from the women in this respect?
So the women ulama that we have been working very closely with come from all 34 provinces of Afghanistan. So the reason why we even undertook this challenge was because many people did not even have an understanding that there was such a thing as a women ulama. Even the Ministry of Hajj and Affairs, they were very shocked that we had a very knowledgeable group of women that had proper understanding about their religion and came from really high educational backgrounds. Many times people assume that people from the provinces are usually uneducated, not understanding of their rights, and very limited exposure to proper education. But the group of women that we saw, they're highly talented, very, very educated, and they come from such diverse, provinces that are, under, even before the Taliban regime, were under the Taliban rule. But these women challenged and worked really closely with the Taliban, I think, which is what was amazing about them, that despite all of the hurdles and challenges that were posed for them, they were willing to find ways to cooperate and to work and to get the Taliban to change their belief and understanding of the situation with the proper, challenges and like definitions and Islamic, evidence as proof posed for the Taliban to challenge their own narrative that the Taliban has been using very consistently throughout time. So the reason why we did that was because in the peace process, there was a delegation of 4 women that had no proper Islamic background. And they were speaking to a group of men that come from a narrative that has always been using Islam as a political ideology and trying to, diminish women's rights with that perspective. And anyone who would even say anything regarding, supporting women's rights, it was constantly challenged with, are you a kafir? Which means, are you a disbeliever then? And a lot of people could not say anything because they didn't have enough of the Islamic background and knowledge to challenge that narrative. So we decided that it would be best to have a group of women that were smart and educated in this regard to be used as an instrumental tool in the peace process to help the delegation, if not be in the delegation, enhance their knowledge about Islamic understanding so that they could, on the women Islamic ulama's behalf, challenge the Taliban's narrative. However, everything changed, and now we have to look at it in a different light. So now the reason we are working really closely with our women ulama is to see ways that we can support the rights of women that are now under great scrutiny by the Taliban, and see how can we, get a way to get those rights back, because Afghan women are not the same as Afghan women back then. There is, there's many differences from that time period. There is access to media, there's access to social media, there's access to phones. Everyone is just, doing their own form of citizen journalism. And I think that is the biggest shift. I'm sure that there were challenges and resistance by women before as well. but I think that it was not as much showcased. So the world was silent and the world was blind. But now, even if the world chooses to be blind, Afghans are taking charge of their own narrative, and they're ensuring that the blind glasses that people are wearing comes down, because it's not a choice anymore. 36 million Afghans' lives are at risk, and the international community must see what is happening, and they cannot choose ignorance, and they cannot choose oblivious, attitude, because that is not going to cut it anymore. So that's our main goal, is to use our Women Ulama network to support and find ways for those that are inside Afghanistan and protecting their rights, and promoting a more equilibrium and a bit of a balance in the sense of promoting women's rights and taking back the rights from the military regime.
Thank you, Hareer. Let me close this extremely interesting conversation with you with a very brief question, and I will ask you to be also very brief because time is going very fast. So leaving no voice behind, do you have any other experiences you would like to share? For example, I'm thinking of women in rural areas, women without education or other opportunities, victims of gender-based violence. I know the question is very big, but we only talk, let's say, about educated women, and most of the population of Afghanistan, this is not the case for them. So can you very briefly give us the tone on these issues? Thank you.
So even women that have no basic access to education, they do have some access to education before, even in the rural areas. If it was not quality education, we were working closely with families to, promote and allow their girls to have education, whether that was in a quality format or not, because I think having any kind of education is better than no education. So a lot of times I get personal calls from these women in rural areas telling me that we want to continue our education, and we want to be able to go to schools. Now, the Taliban is comparatively less strict in the rural areas because there's not much challenges in that department, but there are still some really, really big resistance happening from those provinces as well. But the main issue that the Taliban is posing is for the major cities, that they're not allowing girls to continue their education from 7th to 12th grade and even onwards. And I think that the reason is not that, women should not have an education. I think it's a way that Taliban are smart enough to use it as a leverage on international community to get funding, get money. And I think that is the strategy they're going with. But I think once the world turns a blind eye, they're gonna go and continue doing whatever they want in every part of Afghanistan. So I don't think that the problem is the lack of access to education of women and people in the rural areas of Afghanistan, because we had access. It was not as good quality of an access, but there were still educational platforms. And I know that, like, for example, some of the women ulamas that we are working with, they were directly teachers in those institutions and educational platforms, teaching these women, whether that was through going to their homes, whether that was through other models, it didn't matter. A lot of women were putting effort into educating people and giving them access to education. Maybe it was not the Western definition of education, but it was some format of an education.
Thank you so much, Hareer. I keep from this last answer that the international community needs not to turn the blind eye to the development. So as a human rights community, we will be following closely the events and thinking ahead in solidarity with the people of Afghanistan. Thank you so much.
I have one more point though. One thing is that from the international community, we don't just expect solidarity and, not turning a blind eye. We expect active actions in the sense that the evacuation efforts still need to be continued. There are so many human rights defenders that are still in Afghanistan, and they're facing very bureaucratic processes that are hindering them from having access to saving their lives. In a situation as dire as such, I think that the bureaucracy of the system and issuing visas needs to be diminished. And I think that more, priority should be given to the human rights and the human life, and not whether or not there's an allegiance to a certain country. Secondly, I think that the international community must use their role actively in ensuring that the Taliban, if they want to be recognized and legitimized, they need to ensure trust building with the local community. They need to ensure trust building with the international community. And the international community must not just do the same thing they did with the prior government, which was give money and then turn a blind eye. They have to actively go and see where the money's going. Third, there should be support for those women and human rights defenders that are in exile. There's multiple Afghans that are in horrible living conditions. And I think that it is really crucial that we take our platform and do what we can do, at least for them. And fourth, if all of these still fail, I think that we should support, the international community must support Afghan women that are still inside Afghanistan and give them proper funding and promoting and doing their work in order to not be without any kind of employment and job and go back to those and have all of that progress and achievements go back down the drain. So thank you. Now I'm done.
Thank you. You have already started live the reflection in solidarity. Thank you, Hareer. Voice heard. Thank you so much. We now have in the program the conversation with Sima SAMAR. Let me say a couple of words on Sima SAMAR by the time you can see here on the screen. So Sima SAMAR is a 2012 Right Livelihood laureate. She served as in the interim administration of Afghanistan and established the first ever Ministry of Women's Affairs. And from 2004 to 2019, she chaired the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission that holds human rights violators accountable as a commitment that has put her own life at great risk. In December 2019, Sima SAMAR was appointed as a member of the United Nations Secretary General's high-level panel on internal displacement, and she is also a member of the UN Secretary General's high-level advisory board on mediation. So I think we can now follow this conversation with Sima SAMAR, and let me thank her for her time and energy. Hello, let me welcome you, Mrs. Sima SAMAR from the UN on behalf of the Global Campus and the Venice School. We're particularly honored having you to express the voice or the voices of many women from Afghanistan. Afghanistan is a country torn by conflicts, and we all know what this means for women. Peace, war, all social phenomena are gendered because they have different impact on men, different impact on women. They all suffer from this. So we would like to listen from you. We follow very closely the developments in Afghanistan, and we would like to hear from you as you have exercised significant positions, both in your own country as a minister, but also in the United Nations, as you have been recently appointed by the United Nations Secretary General on a panel on internal displacement in December 2019. So looking forward to listening from you.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, and it's my pleasure to be part of your program. And thank you very much for including and raising the awareness about the human rights situation in Afghanistan. As you know, that Afghanistan has been at war, and it is 44 years that the people are suffering from conflict. Different regime came to power in Afghanistan and gone, but unfortunately, all of them really violated the human rights of the people. The people of Afghanistan were actually caught between the extreme left, which was the pro-Russian, and then the extreme right that we currently have in the country. So both sides, or all of them, violate the human rights and committed war crimes and crimes against humanity, but without accountability and justice. Who suffered? The normal people, and mainly, of course, women. As you said, that conflict and war have different impact on people, and the most serious impact are in women's rights, because women become more vulnerable to different violation of human rights, including forced marriages, child marriages, and also forced prostitution, and put under a lot of restriction by the family member, also under the name of protection. What we see today, what the Taliban does, not allowing girls to go to school, not allowing girls to go to university, Kabul University particularly, not to teach and not to get education, under the name of protection. So they claim that they protect the women in Afghanistan. So that become kind of a norm in a patriarchal society. Of course, war and conflict promote patriarchy, promote masculinity. So that has always very, very negative impact on basic rights of women.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. This is indeed very important. And most of the issues you have mentioned, they have already been identified by the CEDAW committee, so the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, in the list of issues that was identified and shared with the government of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. And as you rightfully mentioned, education is key. Education, employment are very strong parameters of women's human rights. So if they are to be in a position to exercise equality and human rights, they need to have a certain degree of autonomy over their lives. And education and employment are key in this respect. So in your view, as the conflict is an old one, as you said, a lot of governments from all the political spectrum run the country, but the result was, allow me to say, similar for women. How do you see the developments currently in Afghanistan, and what can be done by women to safeguard the legal achievements that can be so with so many difficulties gained by women in Afghanistan?
Well, as you know, that 20 years ago, Taliban was in power, and they were removed by the after the 9/11 by the international community, or military intervention by international community. In the last 20 years, we had some achievement, including the establishment of Ministry of Women's Affairs, and also establishment of the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission, promotion of civil society. We changed a lot of legislation in the country. We had a better constitution, more freedom for the people, the minorities, and tried to promote equality. Of course, reaching equality is a long process, even in developed countries, but let alone in countries like Afghanistan. But it was what was lacking, a long-term strategy for really building a democratic society. There was a lot of, I would say, a lot of patience for corruption, for mishandling of whole process of democratic process. It was a lot of discrimination against the minority groups even by the government before Taliban. All those actually create the environment for Taliban to become more powerful. And lack of united approach by all the international partners in Afghanistan, because each one of the country which was involved in Afghanistan, they had their own kind of a policy, and they were not listening to the people because they were thinking that they know Afghanistan and they will really make Afghanistan a democratic, prosperous society, which was a mistake. So now I think all those achievements somehow is gone, because the constitution is not anymore in place or is respected. They announced that the constitution of 1964, which was during the king, that is in place. In that constitution, there's not enough space for religious minority groups in Afghanistan. They only accept the Sunni sect of Islam, which itself is a violation of human rights. And all the other, like Ministry of Women's Affairs is abolished. Instead, they established the Ministry of Vice and Virtue, which is, of course, a ministry which restricts more women's freedom and movement, freedom of movement and rights. So the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission, which we had a lot of achievement on that front, is abolished. One of the things that I could mention that we achieved was the reduction on torture. Torture was very common in Afghanistan, but it was reduced to, I mean, our aim was not to reduce only, but to abolish. But the reduction was a good step, and that is gone. Now they are torturing people anywhere on the street, in the detention centers. I mean, there's no due process or fair trial in Afghanistan, which was at least not in a base practice, but it was good. So all those are gone. And I think the history showed that the problem in Afghanistan will not stay in Afghanistan boundary or in our border. It will reach everywhere. And you can see that the violation of human rights continues. And the extremist group learn from each other. The other mistake which was really done and put Afghanistan in a very precarious situation was the invasion in Iraq, or the intervention in Iraq. So all the attention went to Iraq, and now Iraq is in bad situation. Afghanistan is similarly in bad situation. So you could see that the extremist group or the terrorist group is learning from each other, and they try to apply all those issues in different countries. And what I would say that it's very, very clear that you cannot reach to a development, you cannot reach to prosperity, you cannot reach to peace without a program which is people-centered and inclusive. Inclusive means for sure inclusive of women, meaningful inclusivity of women, not symbolically. Meaningful inclusion of women in the program on every aspect of life. Take it from education, economy, and every other things. I think few issues which is really important to continue. One is to promote education in every level. Still, education should be promoted, and not really, it doesn't mean that we should promote the way Taliban wants. We should use every opportunity to promote good quality of education. Let's say access to best quality of education, or the newest science or update quality of education. And access to healthcare is really key for women. I mean, and if they don't have access to reproductive health, it will be disaster. So forced marriages, child marriages are promoted, and child marriages is a violation of the being a mother and their body is not ready. And then if they start producing children from the age of 14 until 50, then you can imagine how many children they can produce and how much is the mother and infant mortality will increase in the country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. I think this is key. Education is for sure with very important parameter. Have we become more wise as international community in dealing with those issues? Because we know that, as you said, women have become more vulnerable during the conflicts, but we all know that if the recovery and rebuilding of the country is to become a reality, women are quite often the backbone of this recovery, of this rebuilding, visible in their visible or invisible capacity, but they are there and they are working for the resilience of their country, for the sake of their children, for the sake of their country. So I have one question on, as most of the population in Afghanistan lives in rural areas, we all know again that the situation of women and women's rights in rural areas are very difficult to secure, and women might suffer, let's say, more on in a different way from what women experience in cities. So do you have a recommendation for rural women in Afghanistan, their education, their human rights protection?
Well, I think women in rural areas has limited access to a lot of facilities. That is clear. But in current situation, I think all of them are very, very vulnerable, because women in the cities had access to some kind of a protection mechanism. Like there was a family response unit in the police, and there were female police who were helping. There was a prosecutor office for violence against women. All of these are abolished. There was Human Rights Commission, there was Ministry of Women's Affairs who were taking care of these cases, but that is gone. And the life in the city, in fact, is more difficult for women, because they are more women who are house head. I mean, the head of the family, and they are the one who works. And now women are not allowed to work. The city educated women, they are not allowed to work. Or the one who was working maybe as a domestic worker in some families, they don't have the work. First, because of the coronavirus, COVID virus. Secondly, because of the economy in the country. People cannot afford to pay another person to come and help and work for them. So the people actually, generally, all the people are in a three main crises. One is the political crisis that the government is not clear. There's no law and no protection, no basic social services, which has really put the people in a very vulnerable situation. And the people don't know what is the future. If you see currently these days in front of the passport office, you feel that how people are desperate. Thousands of people are lining up for passport, and there's no capacity to handle all those. The second crisis in the country is the humanitarian crisis, which you saw, and we all see that it was drought, and people were displaced because of the conflict. And they were displaced during the harvest collection. So even in the rural areas, they were displaced and they could not really take their harvest. It was time for good melon in the northern part of the country. In the other part of the country, it was time for apricots, for almonds, for all these livelihood. They couldn't get it. And they become so vulnerable to the situation. The third crisis is the COVID crisis. COVID already destroyed the economy of a lot of countries, more developed countries are in crisis, let alone Afghanistan. And the hospitals and health facilities are really getting out of resources. So, I mean, they're shrinking. So there's no support for the clinics and hospitals, which was run by different NGOs. And actually it was under the Ministry of Public Health. They're collapsing. They are out of resource and they cannot. And then the people did not or could not get vaccinated because there were no vaccine in the country compared to the other developed countries. So it is, people are really vulnerable and under three main crises. And I think what we should do, we should create job opportunity for the women who are living in the rural areas or in the urban areas. Instead of only providing relief items, food items for them, give them job opportunity, buy their handcraft, create market for them. They can do, all women in Afghanistan know how to do embroidery. Or there's a lot of family who know how to do the carpet, although I'm not in favor of child labor, but they have to survive. How do they survive? So those, I mean, when you give them job opportunity, when you give them income, as you said, it gives them the dignified life, a kind of a resilience more than be dependent on the relief. So that is something that should be done. And education, as I said, that it's key. We have a say in Afghanistan that if you educate a man, you educate a person. If you educate a woman, you educate a family and you educate a society, which is true. Education in any possible way, if it's homeschool, if it's in the mosque, if it's under the tree, if it's in the proper classroom. We need to give that rights to the people and respect to the people to stand, empower them to stand for their own rights, to stand and take the responsibility of the country in the future.
Excellent. So you already shared not only the context and the specific situation in Afghanistan, but also shared with us some practical measures on what can be done as a recommendation. So to close this interesting discussion, I think it would be nice to hear from your perspective what can be done maybe at the UN level. So what does the international community can do to support, to empower Afghan women? What can civil society organizations do for them, and acting in solidarity? Because I think when in a country women in a conflict country face difficulties and try to rebuild as they can their own country, we need to stand by them to support them in finding their own way on how to build resilience and to bring about peace, to protect human rights, to secure women's human rights in their own country. So from this institutional perspective, what would be your recommendation from, let's say, the simple citizen in the international community or in Afghanistan to international organizations and other countries? How can we help Afghan women?
Yes, one, I think the countries should be engaged with Taliban. It doesn't mean that they should be recognized. Recognition is far from what we wish. They should be engaged and pressurize them to accept the human rights of the people, and particularly the human rights of women. Number two, I think no one should really negotiate with Taliban on human rights principles. The excuse that people are using that the human rights is Western value, it's not Western value, it's a human value. That excuse should not be used. That we respect the culture, we respect the religion of Afghanistan. Nowhere in religion there's a restriction on human rights. because we, as a Muslim, it started when the first message came to the Prophet was said, Iqra, read. So you can't read if you don't go to school. The third point, I would say that it should be united approach and pressurize the countries who is supporting Taliban. And that is key. Four, I think the civil society and women's organization, people like you, should be our voice, because we might not be able to speak very openly. I mean, I really avoid doing interviews publicly on those big media outlets because of the harm that might reach to my family. My family is still there, my organizations are still there. So that is also something that you can be our voice, and you can support that. And the final word that I would say that in any possible way, we need financial support, but in a proper way, not to Taliban, to local NGOs, through UN with clear mechanism to reduce corruption, because there is a corruption, and I mean, we know the system, unfortunately, and we should not promote corruption more in Afghanistan. And it should be accountability. And the lack of tolerance of commission of war crimes and crimes against humanity in Afghanistan, and sexual gender-based violence. We should condemn and call for justice. Otherwise, this continue the violation of international human rights and humanitarian law in the world. And they learn from each other. As I said, that they learn from Daesh in Syria, they learn from Boko Haram, Boko Haram learn from us, they learn from Al-Shabaab, everywhere. So that will not stay in our, and we should learn from the history as well.
Thank you so much for this conversation.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you so much. All the best to the Afghan people and to the Afghan women.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sima.
Thanks.
So we are back. It was a very interesting conversation with Sima SAMAR, who gave us, I think, a more institutional and very important conversation on this issue. We tried in this session to have both international organizations' experiences from young people, Sima SAMAR experience as a former minister and high-level UN official, but also, and very importantly, a young woman who is here in person in Venice in the IMA program and willing to share with us her own experience. So my first question to you, Najiba, is you're a young Afghan woman, an educated woman who is interested in human rights. So what is your perspective on this issue, on what is going currently in Afghanistan? How was this experience for you, and what you want to share with the Sakharov Fellows and the Venice School Fellows here?
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm Najiba HAIDARY, and I recently joined Global Human Rights Campus, and I'm lucky that during the transition period of, the government collapse, I was not in Afghanistan. Otherwise, I don't know if I could make it happen and my participation to EMA program. Human rights values, of course, it's global, and it's under each religion. It's not, it is human rights, and human rights are being practiced by each religion and by each community, countrywide and worldwide. From beginning of my career, I was interested to have the voice of the people, especially for women and children. So I started my career with advocating for women's rights, especially women's political participation under Security Resolution 1325, which is for women, peace and security. Later on, I started working both under UN systems and also voluntarily. My work as volunteer was with group of young women and men, I mean girls and boys, to support girls' education. And under UN system, I worked with the very grassroots level for women's political participation and youth and adolescents participation at the community level and at the national level. That's why I was really interested to also have the, experience with the global campus, because I knew that there will be lots of diversities, lots of things to learn and to engage, and also the opportunity to share my concerns and my people's concern. I needed their voice to be heard at any stage and any platform. Unfortunately, what is going on currently in Afghanistan, all of the world knows that it's unfair. As Dr. Sima SAMAR and also Ms. Hareer HASHIM told and referred about the achievement that we had during the 20 years, especially for, democratized system governance, it was not the best, of course, but given the issues and realities of the ground, that Afghanistan has passed 40 years of war, had the black period of Taliban during 90s, also coming to the new systems that people were, they did not have any idea of democracy, and how they step by step experienced that, from the women's right to child rights to citizenship right. It was at first not really easy for them to receive and digest and practice. But during these 2 decades, we were hopeful that we are reaching somewhere, especially our youth groups who born during the period and they studied and they got educated. They had, great wishes for themselves and for their countries. But unfortunately, what happened, we were about to more develop the democratized society, but it was totally collapsed, and now we are experiencing the system which are against democratic values and human rights values in our country. This is one of the painful experiences, not by me as a young, as an adult, but also for our youth and adolescent groups who are totally traumatized, and our women who experienced a lot, who suffered a lot, and they got educated and they got different positions at the leadership level, at the political level, and also at the judiciary level. But what happens now, most of them are unsafe, most of them are at their homes hidden. And when I am honestly talking with my friends, with my networks, with my relatives, they all lost hope that what is going to, with their future. So this is one of the issues which is not only concern for Afghanistan, but since it is human rights issues, I think it's global issue and global problem that we are facing.
Yeah. Thanks, Najiba. I think it was very clear from Sima SAMAR conversation that human rights are not to be negotiated with the Taliban, and the international community need to really be make a strong point on this. You're right in saying that the younger generation now lost hope, as you said. I guess it's because they grew up with a degree of freedom, aspirations for democratic life, and all this. Of course, the contextual factors were not the best ones. Corruption, for example, in the system. How do you think that young people can get empowered, can be empowered both internally and from externally? How can the international community assist this? Because I think we all agree that education is key, and education has the merit of nobody can deprive you of your education. They can take your life, but they cannot take your education. And I mean, being myself from a country that experienced war, there was a very big trend to educate the children after the war, because parents understood that this is the only thing nobody can take off you. So what can we do today for children's education in Afghanistan and girls' education in Afghanistan?
So of course, for the empowerment of the societies, especially for the young generation, education is key. I cannot say that we had the best quality education and we had full access, because according to recent reports during 2019 and 2020, we had 3.7 million children out of school, but 60% of these children were girls. So this is one of the realities that we had during the previous government. And the reasons were different. We can say that insecurity and access to schools, one of the keys. The other issue was about the social norms and under the name of protection for the girls. Lack of female schools were challenged, and inaccessibility to schools because of the distance, because we have a very, trouble to reach areas because our country is totally mountainous, and it's difficult to reach from one point to another point, and different many other reasons. But what happens now, even we had 3.7 million children out of school because of the different reasons. Now we are having countrywide only 5 provinces who are having girls allowed going to schools. 4 of the provinces are in north, and 1 of the provinces are in central region. And what's the reason that they are, allowing the girls to go to school is that the local authorities at the provincial, they are not much obeying the central government, which is, some of the decrees by Taliban. And they are struggling to just proceed with what we have and support girls' education. The rest, from 29 provinces, we are having totally restricted laws for the girls to attend their school. These are the issues. And when we are also coming to the boys, there are certain problems. School teachers are not paid. Why? Because we have different funding freezes from international community, which was somehow supporting the flow. We lost the system which was in place. When transition comes, when stability comes, people are not mentally safe, and they cannot go to school and attend regularly. Different factors. So the system for education, it is totally damaged, but we have the hope, of course. And one of the hopes that, as you also mentioned, about not negotiation of any rights of any human rights, and the education is key. For the international community, that what they can do is, of course, as Dr. Sima SAMAR also mentioned, that support the people of Afghanistan through different other non-governmental channels, as they mentioned, the UN system and also other NGOs. Why? And why not through the current system of the government? Because we have not a systemized approach. I cannot say that we are having a proper government right now, because we do not have president at the leadership. We have different capacities at the ministerial level that we cannot ensure that how the funding can go and is spent by them. These are the certain challenges that we can see. Externally, of course, there can be many opportunities for the youth. For example, there are different organizations who are providing scholarships through different channels, and I would really, emphasize that it should be for earlier ages, for the bachelors and for the different courses, for the even for the schools that help the talented and passionate youth generation to go out of Afghanistan, learn a lot of things, and go back and build their countries. Because we have hope, and I'm sure that current situation will not, last long.
I keep we have hope. That's very
no,
important.
Of course.
Yes. I would like to open the floor for questions on your behalf. Najiba is here. And then give the floor to Manfred and Stefan for their comments before concluding. So, questions? Yes, please. Yes, come here for the micro. Thank you.
It's actually a question or comment for Hareer. Hi, Hareer. I'm Irina. I was so touched and moved by your presentation today. I wrote you that's why I wrote you a personal message. And I think what you said, especially at the end, I think it's something that is urgent. The continuation and the effort of the evacuation efforts, the stopping of the bureaucratic procedures for visas, and of course funding for women who unfortunately will stay in Afghanistan. And I think those are the words that should be spread by us in the international communities. So just if you have any suggestions, our voices are not very important, however, they might help. If you have any suggestions now or in the future, please do not hesitate to recommend to us.
Thank you very much for this offer, and all voices count. I think Manfred has a question.
Yeah, also to both of you. Malala has started a campaign and a personal message asking signatures in order to demand, not only from the Taliban, but from the international community, that all girls that are now ousted from education should actually have the right to go back to schools, and she would like to deliver it directly to the G20 leaders. What do you think about that initiative by Malala?
Personally, I really appreciate her efforts for the girls' education and education at all, because she is also impacted like, the girls are impacted in Afghanistan by the Taliban, and I see that she feels that how it looks like to be under such system, and she wants to bring the change. It's about her effort. One side is all the struggles that coming from her side, but the other side is, the international community, especially G20 states and the systems. What I would say to support Malala's efforts. In addition to that, to join her calling G20 for the support, because it's not only about like Malala experienced the injuries and made her more strong. It's also about the traumatization that we girls faced in Afghanistan. Mentally, and our feelings and our goals, everything that we lost, and currently, although we have hope, but nothing seems to be changed. In short term. So supporting Malala's efforts, at the same time calling for approval or for action from the international community side.
Thank you, Najiba. Stefan, do you have a comment on this?
Not a comment on that. I would have another question.
Please.
Well, Hareer, you talked about the way you tried to challenge the Taliban's narrative. You did this at the time where they were not in power, so there might have been somewhat more better circumstances for doing that than today. We heard from Sima SAMAR that there are grounds to challenge the Taliban's narrative, even with the holy text, with the Quran. So within using religious arguments, is there room now for continuing that, and who would be well placed? Would it really be the international community to do that, who obviously ignores a lot of Islamic principles, is very much mixing all this up with terrorism? Is there a place for actors like Qatar, who should play a pivotal role now with regard to talking to the Taliban? Do you see still room for such an argument to be used? Because when we talk about universal human rights which are not negotiable, of course the international community can pressure on that only with putting conditionality. Yeah, so that's, then it becomes a bargain. Whereas the work you've been doing, it's grassroots work, challenging the very narrative, and that's a different thing. So I would like to hear your views on that.
Yeah, Hareer.
Hi. First, I would like to thank Irina for her very supportive message. And I think that everyone's voice counts. It doesn't matter if you are an individual or if you're a big organization. I think together, collectively, we can make a very big impact. We have such a privileged platform, such as the session we're here in today. And I think that this is a starting point, and hopefully we can continue further from this. And as far as the initiative that is launched by Malala, there's also Shahrzad Akbar and Zarqa Yaftali that are also joined this effort. And there are women human rights defenders as well. And I think that personally, as an Afghan woman, as a young Afghan woman, I think that it is really crucial that we do take any kind of effort that does promote any kind of and any format of educational empowerment for women and educational preservation for women. So, you know, I'm glad that Malala is taking this initiative, but at the same time, I think that it's the least that we can all do from our privileged platform. And as far as your question goes, I think that our work is significant in the sense that it is tackling the grassroots problems, like you mentioned. And the only thing is that I think that every actor that is involved in this situation of Afghanistan, whether it's the international community, whether it's the national actors, whether it's the neighboring countries, I think we all need to utilize our platform to ensure that these women ulama, which is a big network and it's slowly becoming bigger, should be empowered enough and should be included in these discussions. I think that our job is to create the platform, the space for their voices to be heard. We've already held some programs where we've had press statements regarding women demanding further salaries to teachers and the healthcare workers. we had that. And we also had recently a gathering by the women ulama demanding the rights of education and employment from the Islamic perspective in Afghanistan. So we are testing some of the waters to see how would it be accepted and how are the Taliban, working and, accepting our efforts. Obviously, it's not going to be as challenging the narrative more. So it's trying to slowly and using soft diplomacy to change the narrative. But it's going to be a bit of a difficult circumstance for us because we are dealing with them on the ground, and we have to find ways to handle and not jeopardize the lives of so many that are still at risk. So we have to be strategic and tactical. And I think that everyone who has some role to play must play their role in ensuring that these women's voices are heard and that the Islamic knowledge is promoted, and that whether that is Qatar, whether that is Pakistan, whether that is international community, Iran, Uzbekistan, anywhere, I think that we all can play. That's the least we can do.
Thank you so much, Hareer. Any other questions? Because we'll be running out of time. No? So thank you very much. We were particularly pleased and honored to have our distinguished guest with us. And I do hope that this conversation has helped raising awareness among the international community, among institutions, and empowering young people to take this. And in a complex system, we need a multi-entry strategy to be in a position to hold human rights for all to become a reality. Thank you so much. Thank you to all.